Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Infinite Red. This week's episode is episode 176, React Native Final Steps.
Hey everyone, welcome to React Native Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Jamin Holmgren, and today I am joined by, of course, my three awesome co-hosts, Robin Heinz. Hey, Robin, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Jamin.
Awesome. And Aditi Ravichandran. Hey, you're back this time. I'm really happy to have you back. Are you feeling better?
I'm feeling much better now. So yeah, happy to be back.
Did you bring a doctor's note? That's what I want to know.
We tested negative for COVID. So yep, we're good to go.
Oh, okay. I think we're all good then. So you won't have any viruses coming through your radio speakers here. Cool. Also, Harris Robin Kalash, of course. Thanks for coming along. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. A little cold this morning, but it's good here in Canada.
Yeah, we're starting to hit fall here. It's October. We're recording this early part of October, and it's definitely hitting. We have a ton of fog outside.
It's time for the pumpkin spice lattes to come out.
You know, I could go with one of those right now. Today we have with us the amazing, the one, the only Gant Laborde. So Gant, I got to give a little intro here. By the way, hi Gant.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, just a little intro if you don't mind.
Little intro. Okay, I'll keep this short. Gant is my business partner. He and I have been business partner for I think about 2 years, something like that. We've worked together though for I guess 5 years now. I think today. I think as of today, we
is
officially
today
became,
your anniversary? That's so cute.
Today is our
and I didn't forget.
anniversary.
I got you some roses here. There you go, James.
That's so nice. I don't like roses though, so you obviously don't know me, bro. Maybe at the 10 year.
That's right.
Gant is from what I understand, you're a collector of titles. Is that correct?
Yeah,
you collect titles.
Some reason this has become what I'm doing now.
Well, I'm gonna read a few of them.
Okay.
Probably maybe 10% of the titles here. You are a distinguished Toastmaster.
Yes,
of course, from the famous Toastmaster group.
That's quite an accomplishment.
It is.
Thank you. That was
distinguished Toastmaster. That's like the highest Toastmaster you can get, right?
It took 5 years, but I will definitely let you know. I started off terrible, and I went to Toastmasters, and they helped me out. So it's been a really great adventure. I love that entire setup. And during that way, I had all these titles that made no sense to anybody, like certified leader, bronze, public speaker, silver, and all these weird things. But the cool thing about it is, everybody knows distinguished if you've ever been in Toastmasters. That's the final level.
That's pretty awesome.
It's like the black belt of Toastmasters.
Right, yeah. So, at the end of it, you have to stand on stage and break some bricks that are on fire. It's pretty weird. With just your words.
Give us a one sentence of what Toastmasters did. So some people maybe aren't, in an area that has
right.
it.
Okay. One sentence. That's hard for a Toastmaster to do, by the way. In the early 1900s, people decided the best way to get good at anything is to actually practice it. And public speaking, you can only practice in front of other people. So they formed an organization where people could practice speaking publicly with one another and get immediate feedback from their audience so that they can improve, get over their fears, and actually work on public speaking without ever having their first public speaking experience be a real public speaking experience. So I went to that organization. I was afraid to get up in front of anybody, and now y'all can't even shut me up for one sentence.
It's around the world, right?
Yes, it's a worldwide. It is such a great organization. And the second thing I learned from there that I never expected to get was leadership skills. Because when you're doing that, you are working with volunteers. And leading volunteers is its own skill in itself. It actually teaches you so much because at work you can say, I'm the boss, or I have this position, you have to do that. if you ever try to do that Toastmasters, you're just going to get people to unvolunteer.
Yeah.
So it's actually a really cool way of testing out a few things. But the one thing I really appreciate is the confidence that they gave me. And the second most is all the experience that they gave.
That's really cool.
Thanks.
That was also more than one sentence, Gant.
Oh, no. I finished that sentence and y'all asked for more. Okay. That's you can't do that to me.
Fair enough.
So you're based off Portland or?
I'm in New Orleans,
Oh, okay.
which is I love Portland. I used to visit there like 3 times a year or something like that. But now I'm in New Orleans, and if you ever visit New Orleans, come see me. We have lots of conferences come through here, Super Bowls, worldwide conferences, and I will give you a tour. That's everybody listening here. If you're a React Native nerd and you want to hear about New Orleans, when you come through here, look me up.
Definitely take advantage of that. I've done that before, and Gant is an amazing host.
Aww.
So definitely take him up on that. Gant, you're also a Google developer expert in web, and you're a Google developer expert in machine learning. So you're kind of like a double major here. What's that all about?
Well, I'll say that, in the world of Google developer experts, you have some people who are amazing in their craft. And then actually there are some people who put me to shame. They're Google developer experts in everything Google has ever done, which is hilarious. But I could only find myself in those two categories. Web, it's basically that's our premise here. JavaScript gets you web. I did Rails, I did Ruby, I did PHP, I did ASP, both .NET and Classic. So the whole web world of things was easy enough. And as anybody who's looked at my Twitter recently, machine learning is currently my passion. AI, machine learning, getting the computers to do things that they've never done before is wildly exciting for me. So I've been pushing on that really hard for a couple of years now.
Awesome.
So I thought that Google developer expert just meant that you were really good at Googling things. That's not correct or something?
That's called a developer. So that's
we're all Google developer experts. That's what it is.
Yeah, I
And
do.
that's free.
Yeah, of course we look all this stuff up, but it's I think that's just the funniest part about any of this stuff is that, when I was young, it would mattered how much you could actually remember. Now, if you get you a job, it's because you're really good at Googling.
So we're only about 3% through the 10% I said I was going to say about his titles. But we'll go ahead and keep forging ahead here. Media developer expert. What is media developer expert? Are you developing software for CNN here?
Yeah, that's it. I just drive on to Atlanta and I hand them some more software every so often. So Media Developer Expert is a really, really fun program. I highly recommend everybody joins it. It's a little bit easier bar, I don't know if they want me to say this, to join than the Google Developer Experts. And it's basically everybody here in this podcast worried about media, worried about your microphone, your gear, your presentation, yourself. This and the software that kind of goes along with that is the Media Developer Expert Program that's sponsored by Cloudinary. And I think if you go to cloudinary.com/MDE, you can apply there. One of the most fun groups because they have Friday, drink and chats and stuff like that. Things Google could never do.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. You also have an Oracle certification here, Oracle Groundbreaker Ambassador.
Yes.
Okay, this one's interesting. Oracle, which from what I understand, since we've worked together, I don't think we've done a lot of Oracle. I guess we have one project that's doing Oracle, but somehow you picked up this certification along the way. Well,
I just want to say I'm a big fan of TikTok, and now Oracle owns TikTok, so that just totally makes sense, right?
Wow. Well, it seems like you are going from major tech company to major tech company and picking up certifications along the way. We can't leave aside Amazon.
Yeah.
One of the biggest. You are an AWS community builder.
Yeah. So there's a group called the AWS Heroes, which I wanted to join. And I can't join that without being a community builder first. The community builder stuff is awesome. So I don't know if anybody's really messed with Amplify. I'm really excited with that most recently, I've seen, Natter's talking about it all the time.
Natter Dabbit.
They've collected so much talent, and the Amplify stack has been really, really cool, especially for people like us who are eager to get into using GraphQL, and we're trying to throw GraphQL into our apps or do cool stuff like that. But at the same time, you kind of need these serverless functions out there that you can access and that are guaranteed to work with React Native and scale and do all that other stuff. And I'm not going to lie, so that hopefully they don't kick me out the program for this, but that whole AWS service stack used to suck. Like, I didn't know what those things were. I didn't know the difference between Cognito and DynamoDBs and all these other different, what is IAM and all this other stuff. It was not easy. And I really am impressed with the Amplify stack. If you're building something in React Native and you are trying to tie together a whole bunch of Amazon services, definitely try out Amplify. It's fantastic. So I've been building stuff with
Amplify already in last year's Chain React app.
Well, yeah, we used it for the chat. We used it for the chat. That was fun. I built an app for a conference for React Native EU that uses Amplify for Who Said It, which is a game we play at Infinite Red. I used it for Enjoying the Show, which was just featured on the Google TensorFlow YouTube channel. So I've been throwing it around left and right. It's really nice not writing the back-end code and knowing that it's going to work.
It's the way of the future.
Yeah.
So Gant, using your AI, have you cloned yourself or something? Because how do you do so many different things?
I really appreciate that. I'd say that it's all passion-driven stuff. I'm really lucky to be with. So this sounds like a weird plug for Infinite Red, but it really is.
Well, you've been plugging everybody else so far, so hey,
there you go. Infinite Red is a place where if you want to be a shooting star, you can be it. Like, there's no one's going to hold you back or do red tape. If you go to a big box store, sometimes you have to do this, you have to mention that, you have to do these other things. Whereas Infinite Red says, what do you want to do? And then goes, okay, what can we do to help you do that? I've never been turned down speaking for a conference. So if I said I wanted to go somewhere and I wanted to hear a talk, I wanted to do this one thing, it's absolutely, okay, absolutely. We'll send you there. You'll get that information. That's also where I get a lot of these ideas from, because if you go to a conference and you meet people and you talk to them in the hallway track, this is where some of the cool stuff comes up.
Absolutely.
For instance, it was, I came up with this idea of an app that can identify Nicolas Cage or not. And I mentioned that at Chain React, 2017 or something. Right. And Jason Langsdorff says, Gant, you have to build that now, right? So I was on the hook. And so I had to figure out how to make that app after that. Such a great and rich connection really helps out.
Didn't Nicolas Cage actually comment on that
I
on
think,
Twitter?
That one was the guy from Jurassic Park.
No, you're right. That wasn't Nick Cage. That was, what was his name? Oh yeah, that was Jeff Goldblum.
That's it. Yes, Jeff Goldblum.
Another one of your AI experiments.
Jeff Goldblum shows up. That's hilarious. I still actually bring that up in other talks. And people completely agree. Jeff Goldblum cannot keep his fingers out of his mouth, and it totally messes with AI.
Now, we brought you on here not obviously to talk about necessarily AI and ML, but you do have a connection to the React Native community. You used to do a ton of React Native for us. You are a React Native core contributor. You have built some of the most popular open source that we have that is related to React Native, especially Ignite. Ignite's a big thing, and it was created by Gant.
Oh, wow.
So you have that connection with the React Native community. Tell us a little bit about how you've maintained that connection with React Native while you're kind of going in all of these other directions.
I really, it's my heart that the React Native community is just a great group. When you kind of come into JavaScript, it's a giant pond. And one of the things that I really like about React Native is it's a smaller, really friendly group. If you message anybody who's a React Native influencer, you get that DM back. You get that message back. And so I can't, no matter what my passions are, it's always I'm staying inside of React Native forever.
Oh.
It's just a great community.
It is.
So I'm going to shift gears and jump into our topic for today, because a while back, actually not that long ago, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, you wrote an article, Gant, called React Native Final Steps. And I'm actually very, very excited about this topic. One of the things that when you build a React Native app, you tend to think as a developer about, what stack you have, what's your backend going to look like, the design, front end stuff. But you often, as developers, we forget about the final, the last mile, so to speak. And there are a lot of steps. There are a lot of different things that need to be done. It's not just package it up into a binary file and ship it off to the app store. There are so many different things that need to be done. So what I'd like to do is open it up to the rest of the panel here, Harris, Aditi, Robin, as well as Gant, and talk more about those last steps that you take as a React Native developer in order to get your app ready for production and get it up on the App Store. Maybe even talk a little bit about the marketing side, but it's really just sort of the last mile of this. So before we go into that, though, I'd like to ask Gant, how did you think to even write this article?
Well, I'll kind of ask everybody here, how many of you have finished an entire React Native app and then you think that you've crossed this finish line? And then, this happened to all of us, I hope. And you look at what's left in order to get that into the App Store for Google and iOS. And then you find out that even all the stuff you've done isn't enough. Like, I've seen far too many developers cross the finish line and just, I feel good. And you're like, one more mile to go.
Yes. I totally agree
Pretty
with
much
you.
every app.
Yep, almost always that happens. Especially, being a cross-platform application, you have to test through multiple devices. I would say for us, as far as I've been developing React Native for 4 or 5 years now, the biggest challenge has been the testing across multiple devices. So, there's only so many devices you can physically test on. And there's always this one device which is a super small screen and the button's missing. Or there are, plenty of versions of Android. We've seen a lot of Android issues too with, permissions. You have a new library you integrate and then, maybe a camera or something.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. And I'm like, oh, geez, I have to go and change my permission setting and all of that stuff. So it is, having a checklist helps, check off, okay,
Yes.
Did you do all of these things? But I still always do end up seeing something we would have missed.
It's such a painful thing because we have a bunch of React Native experts. And even then, I think only each person maintains around 80 to 90% of the final steps in their head at any given time. I think you hit it perfectly there. You said checklist.
Yeah.
And it's what humans are bad at. So I've been sideswiped with these things. Harris, Robin, what are the things that you've delivered and then been embarrassed about? Tell us all now.
Delivered that I've been embarrassed about. I mean, for me, I think one, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question directly, Gant, but till this day, I still don't fully understand how the certificates work off the top of my head. Yeah. I still have to Google that every time. Also, I mean, it's, on a few projects at Infinite Red, we have these really cool fast lane scripts that help us save time. But those have to be maintained, and there's just so many moving parts in those scripts. Yeah, it's still complicated, even as an expert.
I think there's one person in Utah that knows everything about certificate signing, and we all just ask that person every so often.
It's one of those things that you don't do every single day, so you forget about it. I really like that an article that Gant wrote a long time ago has been our go-to for these types of things. I forget the name of the article, but we can post it in our show notes. But this came from, I don't know, 2017, something like that.
Yeah. It was, I think it was effortless. It was a terrible naming for SEO, by the way. but it was great for people. Effortless iOS releases with React Native, I believe was the title. And then I had effortless Android releases with React Native, I think are the two. And those are live documents that continue to sort of serve as every time I need to go back and release something, I follow that. And if it breaks, I actually update the blog article.
It's actually, I think, simple.
Oh,
React
see?
Native
I don't
iOS
even
releases. It was so effortless that we couldn't remember the name. So little effort, I guess.
Yeah, Fastlane. Yeah, that really helps a lot.
Match is a game changer too.
Raman, explain what Match is all about. Some people may not have used it before.
Match it's a tool. It's made by Fastlane, so it's a Fastlane tool, but it essentially manages your certificates and provisioning profiles on iOS for you. And sort of streamlines the process of sharing those certificates between the other developers on your team. So not only does it sort of store them all in a central location and handle uploading them to Apple, but your other teammates just have to run Fastlane Match development or Fastlane Match App Store to get those certificates on their machine in order to build the app in a production environment or in order to run on an actual device.
Now, the funny story about that is before Fastlane. So I know some people that have only ever known Fastlane, and they're like, "Oh, this seems like it's still
I'm
complicated."
one of those people, Gant.
Well, what's worse is you should have seen what happened when one developer's machine was the only machine they could ever release.
Oh, no.
This happens more than you think.
And so back in Ruby Motion days, I was releasing an app and I had a business partner. This is 2013 or so. And
Ruby Motion, just to define for our listeners, was it was a Ruby-based tool chain that allowed you to build iOS apps. Later, they added Android, but it was primarily iOS apps at the time. Exactly. Gant and I actually met at a conference. Yeah. That was a Ruby Motion conference. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the same day.
Exactly. We that started our that precedes our anniversary, by the way, Jamin. That was even earlier.
Yeah. That was probably at least
2014.
2014.
You were just casual acquaintances. You had no idea what was in store.
That's right. Well, I gotta tell the story a little bit. So this was my first tech conference ever. I'd never been to one, and I was also speaking. I was also the first speaker, which is a great way. I highly recommend going to your first tech conference and giving the very first talk. But I show up, fish out of water, and there's a gathering at a restaurant or something, or a bar or something prior to the conference. I think the night before the conference. Mm-hmm. And I go there and I'm looking around and there's a bunch of people and I see this giant of a man turn around and just be like, Jamin! And he comes over and just huge arms, like swallowing. And I'm not a small guy, but just this huge hug. I immediately felt like I was part of the community. So that was Gant. And that's how Gant is. That's always been my first impression. I actually met Gant prior to almost anybody else that I, now work with.
Yeah, that was super fun. And Jamin had built... You were well known in open source. I say open source really brought our companies together. True. It's totally a great opportunity. And there's so much at the heart of open source that stays at the heart of what we try to do. And like writing, I think it's a continuation, right? Because we feel a pain point releasing apps in React Native. Let's say it. It's not easy. It's easy to screw up, and we're at a point where it's too young for everybody to know all these steps. Not only in knowing Fastlane and how to set that up, but also if you have Fastlane set up, the blog article we're talking about is all the extra steps that are not even very well documented or documented in various places. And I have to say, it feels really nice to have people write comments on Twitter and say stuff like that, because you're meeting your future friends. Just like
you were about to, before I interrupted you were about to talk about how it was with Ruby Motion when we would deploy apps.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah. I actually, my coworker was trying to, or my co-business owner in 2013 or so was trying to release the app, and he would continue to do app releases. And then I was going to start maintaining it. And we tried to switch the certificates from his machine to my machine. And that's when I fell in love with how important Fastlane and Match actually is.
There is one product I remember that actually handled it really well, and you could get away with not using Fastlane. It was called Buddy Build. I don't know if any of you have ever.
Yep.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Apple bought it and killed it, but it worked really well. It worked really well.
That
Yeah.
happens far too often.
That's like going the way of the dodo in mobile development. It's Apple buying something and killing it.
There's just nothing like it. It was really smart. You would give it your Git project. It would figure out almost everything. So it would log in. You would give it your Apple credentials, your Apple email password. It would do everything. It would handle the certificates. You wouldn't even have to. All this certificate stuff, you could get away without really knowing it at all.
It would scrape your iMessages for you and upload them to a server in Russia.
Well, silver lining, Harris, if you build it, someone will buy it and be ready to kill it. So you just keep filling that gap.
That's a good point.
So in your article, React Native Final Steps, this was something that was sort of crowdsourced. You had a few unfinished blog articles in draft, and you put that out there on Twitter. This was by far the most picked of all of those. And so you launched into it, and I'm just going to read off the 8 here, and then we can have sort of a group discussion about what these are all about. First one, remove all your console.logs. And I would assume this also, goes for any type of logging that you wouldn't want to ship to production. Also, squish your images. Squish your images. Not squish, but squish them. Remove default Android permissions. That one sounds kind of really specific, but I'm sure that it's on there because of a pain point. I'm sure all of these are on here because of a pain point. Consider enabling ProGuard and Hermes Engine. We'll talk about those. Quality assurance walkthroughs. Of course, quality assurance is always important here. Check the startup speed for performance issues. Startup speed is something that's often overlooked because often you start it up once and then you're just in there working because of fast reload. Bulletproof your app. And lastly, number 8, re-enable ATS, which I forget what ATS even stands for, to be honest.
App Transport Security.
There you go. So these are the things that you chose to put into your article, and they're great. I actually, I've been releasing iOS apps for years, since 2012, I think was the first time I released one, maybe 2011, somewhere in that range, which was not a native app. That was a PhoneGap app. But you still had to kind of go through that process.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of these things that I actually had never thought about before. There were several that were more obvious, but a lot that I hadn't thought of. This is a great article.
It's worth noting that a lot of these are things that you may be able to get your app through the review process and successfully in the store without doing some of these things. But it's going to lead to a worse experience for your users. So I think a lot of them would get overlooked. And so it's good. It's a good reminder that there's things you could do that you may be able to ship without them, but it's really better to do them.
Yeah. What's really funny is keeping console logs in there actually doesn't cause any problems except for performance problems.
Right.
Specifically, I saw on Android. And so you click something, and I have no idea what it's doing once you do a production build or why that was allowed to sort of kind of go out there. But it is trying hard to console.log something. And it makes the Android builds unusable.
It is possible. Now, I'm not sure about React Native console logs, but it is possible to pick up on NS logs in production if you hook it up to the device manager in Xcode and kind of scan through that console. So it's possible it's trying to write to something like that. But yeah, there's no real point. Most of your users aren't going to be scanning for console logs. This is going to be, something that's just doing extra work for nothing. And IO is famously slow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so these are, I would dare say, don't feel bad if you ever look at this article or take a look at these things and you didn't do one or several of these things. Hopefully, look at them and feel excited that you can go grab an app that needs to be released or that's recently been released and then do these checks and then produce a much faster and efficient app.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention that this is all. Don't feel bad if you read this list and you're like, I haven't done any of these things. So that was definitely one of my first thoughts. I was like, oh, I didn't do that.
Shame-driven development.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for the next time or the most recent time.
So I was going to ask a general question to everyone. So I use TestFlight all the time and have like plenty of beta testers on. Do you guys do that too at Infinite Red?
Yeah, totally. TestFlight's something that is constantly being used. Now, the number of beta testers really does depend on our client. We had a project that we did just recently where we were kind of begging the founder to bring on more beta testers because we really needed more testing of it. We never ended up quite getting enough, and we did end up having a few issues that had to be fixed, at the front end of launching. It really is important to have lots of beta testers on there early on in a
What do
project.
you use for Android? So TestFlight for iOS and Android?
The Play Store will let you release an open beta or a closed beta. So you can either add a specific list of people or you can make it an open beta and just give people a URL.
Okay, yeah. We've been using Crashlytics, and I think that got merged with Play Store now. I'm not sure.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's one of the biggest pain points is that these formulas, this list, they keep changing.
Right, yeah.
The Play Store just recently, I think, changed their entire UI. And you could try to go do something and you're like, I used to know where this was. And that's very painful for a developer who's got something. You say to the client, hey, I'm gonna put this out there. Oh, I know how long it takes me to go ahead and put this out there. Don't worry. The new build will be out in 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then you pull up the UI and nothing is right in the world. You're like, all right, I said 15 minutes. I have an hour's worth of sort of refinding the things I know. It's an ongoing problem. And I think it's important, like podcasts talk about it and blog posts talk about it. Because otherwise, it does feel like shame-driven development.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a pain point of, I feel like, the entire ecosystem where we have to keep up with multiple platforms.
Yeah.
But then again, it's a trade-off we've accepted, and I don't see anything better unless maybe you're looking into Flutter, which has its own trade-offs. But yeah.
That's a fair point. So Gant has this funny little hack. He simply reassigns console.log to a no-op function if you are in prod, if you're in production. And so then any time that you're calling log, it's simply, running a function that does nothing and moving on. I assume that's much, much faster.
It's smart, yeah.
Well, I like that one. Now, there is a package you can install that will go in and remove your console setups. So you can actually have it so it'll conditionally do that for a production build, and you don't have to write any code.
Babel plugin transform remove console. That's the name of the package.
Yes. I think that one requires that you bring in a Babel RC, whether you had one or not. There's a bunch of other things. But what I like about changing the control of patching console.log or console.anything is that if you did use some kind of service like Crashlytics or someplace where you would like that information to still end up, you can just write that code and then all the console logs turn into sort of these asynchronous send-offs to bring this information still to you if you really, really wanted it. And so you can null them out or you can send them to a place where QA people can check them out.
What I want to know is if someone's done this and it's introduced a bug in production where the previous console logs were solving a race condition because they were slowing it down just enough. When you speed it up, then it shows up. I'm sure this has happened. I've never run into it myself, but it does seem like something that would happen. When you observe it, it fixes itself.
I'm pretty sure you just gave a bunch of people nightmares is what you just did.
You also talk about squishing your images. So this is something I remember you actually built this thing a long time ago, a website.
Oh, yes.
That would crunch your images for Rails apps. And I think it was some sort of a hack, like a hack night thing or something.
Yes,
Tell us
indeed.
about that thing.
I built this one service that was a GitHub setup, and what it would do is when you would do a commit, it would automatically take that commit and it would run all of your images in the commit through a compression with optimization, and it was called crusher.io. I don't own the domain anymore. Don't go there. I can't trust whatever is there, so have no idea. And what would happen is it would resize the images down to optimized, and the default configuration is lossless. It would keep them exactly at the same quality. And then if there was an optimization in size, it would do a pull request to your repo for you with those smaller image sizes. And I loved this idea. Truth is, it died because I tried to learn Angular. We did the project, I think, using Rails with just vanilla JavaScript, and then we tried to move it to Angular, and I could not grab Angular 1. It was just not sticking in my head. It was Angular 1 was like a hockey stick of knowledge. You just suck for 6 months and then you know something. And the truth is, what we built in 48 hours for the hackathon was infinitely better than what I ended up with trying to add Angular, so the project kind of died. But that intuition is forever important. If you're sending off an image that's 20 times the size and has all the EXIF data that's not being used by your app at all that stuff needs to be compressed out. Your SVGs could be simplified. Everything could be simplified down. And that's kind of what the key step is.
Since crusher.io is no longer available, it looks like it's for sale now for almost $4,000. But there are other apps out there. I'm going to ask the panel, does anybody have any app? Do you use apps? You know, what apps do you use to kind of compress your images? Or is there some other way that you get your images compressed already? For example, I think that a lot of times our teams, if they're working with our designers, will say, can I get an optimized version of this image? Which is nice because the designers often can compress images in a way that is, you know, acceptable to the designers and not just to a developer's eye.
We usually do the same. We work with like a outsourced firm that does like, you know, gives us all the design, and we ask for like the compressed version. And I've noticed that using SVG, you know, improves the performance too compared to like using PNGs and other things.
That's interesting because I remember trying to use SVGs in React Native and having a lot of trouble, especially I think we may have been trying to use network images, and network SVGs don't work very well.
We also had trouble with SVGs like maybe a couple years ago, but now I think with like the updated versions, it just seems to work fine. And I like that we have the flexibility to, you know, change the colors and all of that stuff through code. So yeah, it's been a little efficient for us using SVG icons.
Gant uses squoosh.app, right?
Yes. So one of the things that you can do, they're amazing. Image Optim is perfect. So if you have that just running locally, what a great way to have it automatically optimizing everything. There are some times where playing with the algorithm or the image that you brought in doesn't end up being the size that it actually is in the app. So the reason I put this step in here is because it is a manual drag each image into Squoosh as just a free website. You can actually play with the different levels of optimization, the different levels of everything. And I even found one that was not optimized at all that I thought I had optimized. So there was some kind of edit or mistake that happened to it. And so in the blog post, I found one that was 49% smaller after running it through Squoosh. So this sort of, as a final step, it's a final walkthrough of what you're about to ship. It's a great chance for you to remove images you're not even using anymore, resize images that are not at the size that you thought they were going to be, and then finally play with the different optimization methods that exist to see if you can squeeze out significant portions of your bundle size.
So really this is about reducing the bundle size, is that correct? That's the consequence if you don't do this step is
right.
Your app will be bigger.
You've got a bigger app for no good reason. You're slowing down things. You're pulling in more RAM to process this stuff. I know it's starting to feel like, just like in web, people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. You know, the phones can handle it. This can handle it. That can handle it. But it's pretty easy to nickel and dime yourself into an exceedingly ridiculous bundle size that's embarrassing when someone finally notices.
Yeah. One way I've noticed if I have like really large images is when I use Flipper, there's this plugin that basically just like, I think it just tells you everything that's the size of everything that's going through the network and the bridge and all this stuff on Flipper. And like once I remember opening it up on one of the apps I was working on and seeing these huge images, like not even realizing because they're local, right? Like at some point they're cached, so I don't even realize how big they are. So Flipper is a good way to maybe see if you should probably be looking into optimizing your images.
There's another one that you added here called remove default Android permissions. And this one is something that if you don't do this, the consequence seems to be that Android will ask for far too many permissions. Is that correct? Yeah, it's just often kind of the kitchen sink, and you don't always need the kitchen sink for your app.
It's relatively not kitchen sinky. It's kind of nice what they do. Whether you did anything or asked for anything or not, you get, I'd say there's about 5 or 6 Android permissions that just get asked for by React Native. And you probably need one that's not one of those 6, but you also need half of those 6. You need like 3 of them. So you can actually lower it. But if you just ship it straight out the door, you're asking for a little bit more than you might even need.
Oh, yeah. So in your article, you list them out. There's internet, there's system alert, there's read phone state, there's read and write external storage, and there's a check license one as well.
Yeah, for ads, which you may not have.
Right. Yeah. So that is it's just a good thing to just jump in there and see what exactly your app actually needs. You may have had to add a few more as you're going through it. I would assume, things like geo positioning, location, etc.
Yeah, it was surprising to me. I thought it would kind of come in 100% vanilla, but obviously it can't, and it makes sense. It kind of needs to be a development, to set that development wire network it has. It already has to come with a few things anyway.
Let's move on to the next one. Number 4, consider ProGuard and Hermes for Android. Seems to be quite a few Android-specific things here. I'm sure there are iOS-specific things as well. But as of React Native version 0.60.4, you can turn on ProGuard. You can also turn on Hermes. So does someone want to take on what Hermes is?
It's a new JavaScript engine for Android. It replaces, I believe, it used to be called JSC, so JavaScript Core, and it's much faster. It mostly optimizes startup times and memory usage, I believe.
And I remember they released this last year at Chain React, right? The first time they talked about it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, indeed.
I'm also looking to try to get someone from the Hermes core team on the podcast, so watch for that. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with them about what the work that they're doing over there. It's very cool stuff, very interesting stuff. So that would be something to check to potentially enable it. One of the downsides is that it's still somewhat beta, but Facebook is using it from what I understand. There's also ProGuard, and I to be honest, I don't even know what ProGuard is. Someone's going to have to explain to me what ProGuard is here.
Well, ProGuard's a little bit more on specifically the Android side. So Android developers, regardless of React Native, have been bringing in these really cool skills and set up for optimizing just sort of some of the same concepts we've seen over in web, like tree shaking, obfuscating, just these really cool optimized builds. So when those things get added to Android, they kind of get added as a flag inside of React Native, which is awesome.
Interesting. Okay, so it goes through and kind of just make sure everything is tightened up, smaller bundle size, basically, but a smaller package. That's interesting. So you check that, you turn that on, and you check for issues, but you do mention that there's a reason it's not on by default.
Yeah. I think that it's by far, as we're leaning into these things, we want to be a little more careful, and I love the way that the React Native community has these set as flags. The problem I'll say is that no one knows that that's sitting there as a flag for you to go try.
Yeah.
Not everybody reads every distribution and understands what that means. Sort of like when we look at ProGuard, to someone who's really following the Android development and all the things that are available there, they're like, oh, I can't wait for that to be inside React Native. But if you're just a React Native developer all the time, then you kind of would like a little bit of explanation, because guess what? The platforms are expanding.
Right.
You have Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android. There's definitely a place that someone could build and bring all that information together, and then Apple could buy them and shut them down.
You're right, Gant, because a lot of the React Native developers are originally even web developers, so they may not even have that much background on iOS or Android specific knowledge. So that would really help.
Right.
A little bit more documentation on those would help.
We should all have to take a periodic refresher course every couple months.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's what you missed.
That's not a bad idea. Well, if people listen to this podcast, hopefully they'll get some good information.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, on Ignite, on I guess Browser, do we have ProGuards on by default or
No.
Okay.
We should look into that though. That would be something, to look at and see. Like if we turn it on, I'm a big believer that if we can sort of craft Ignite Browser, our React Native boilerplate, to fit the sort of the 90 percentile, what most people will use. An example of this, I'm actually working on a new version of Browser that is, I'll talk about it later in maybe a future episode. But one of the things that Browser does not come with is unimodules already installed. And unimodules is very helpful to be able to run a lot of Expo packages. Now, not every app needs unimodules, but having that flexibility built in, and there's not a lot of downside to enabling unimodules. It's also a little bit annoying to set it up when you do it manually. So I went through the process of actually setting it up for Browser, for this new version of Browser, so that in the future, when someone spins up a new Browser app, they have it already. They don't have to go through that process. They don't have all the error-prone things. We can kind of pool our knowledge and whatnot. So something like enabling ProGuard might make sense. Now we'd have to, run it through. There's one of the concepts behind Ignite and Ignite Browser is that we're not going to add something unless we've proven it to work in an Infinite Red project. So that's something I would always, double check with people and see, what was your experience with ProGuard, et cetera. Mm-hmm. There's also, number 5 is quality check it yourself. So obviously there's QA. You want to make sure that you're always quality checking. But Gant, you're a big believer in going through it yourself, actually checking a deep QA right before shipping.
It's ridiculously important, and we hate to do it. It's like listening to yourself after a podcast or watching your own talk. No one likes to QA their own app.
I can just see Gant listening to himself on this podcast and hearing that part and cringing.
I think that is exactly what will happen in that part, by the way. It is ridiculous because when you know where the soft points are, the danger points are, you can poke and prod in ways that normal developers can't, but you can also be familiar for when a bug does come in, because they'll do something you would have never thought of. And then you need to have that fresh familiarity of where they are and what's going on. If you haven't worked on that screen in 6 months, I don't care. If you haven't worked on it in a week, we forget these things. So I think it's kind of important to do that. And then I kind of know where the problems are going to be. For instance, I like to make the screen as small as possible. I turn on in-screen calling. I increase the font size. I do all kinds of stuff. So there's a certain screens where it's near impossible for that keyboard not to cover something. And then I think to myself, I say, I think that no one's going to have their font size this big for this screen, for this moment, and be on that tab at that thing. And
Challenge accepted.
Exactly. So if somebody says, if I release it and they say, hey, I was on the settings screen and I couldn't see what I was entering in, or the logo started pushing up over the top, I could be like, do you have your text size increased, or were you in a phone call when that happened, or what's your device? Because I already have a feel of it. And that's just knowing the song you're playing. It's really important, and I know as developers we like to skip this because no one likes to go and watch and criticize themselves. But that final QA step where you're really, really harsh it pays gold when people come in and they finally have something to say.
I think this one is true for any language, anything you're doing.
Yes.
You know, it's not even React Native specific. I was that developer too. You know, initially be like, I'm just gonna code. You go test it. You know, QA person, and then the QA person comes in like, oh my gosh, did you not look at what you coded? Like, there's this like 1,000 bugs. You know, and then you realize.
I think we've all had that experience.
So I think
the answer is no, I did not.
I think that's like almost like a moral responsibility. Just, you know, double check and make sure there's no like obvious things at least. Yeah.
It actually makes you stand out because so many people don't do this, that if you just do that, you stand out quite a bit.
Wow, was such an awesome developer. No bugs.
It really is one of those things where it's easy to talk yourself out of it. And so actually that section I started off with 3 common reasons why people don't do it. You know, I say like, oh, but I have a QA team, right? It's just, that doesn't mean you get by with whatever they didn't catch or stuff like that. It's easy to say I don't have to do it.
One of the big criticisms of React Native is that you can often end up with kind of a slow startup time for your app because it has to load the whole JavaScript bundle unless you've enabled Hermes, which solves a lot of that problem. Because of that, it is really important to check the startup and check for performance issues. Now, there are reasons, you know, things that you can do to mitigate this. Obviously, bundle size is a big deal. Inline requires can often be a huge benefit, and you go over that in your article, Gant. You talk about ABI splitting for Android, and there are a few other techniques that can happen. I've also, you know, there are also some things you can do to just make it feel reasonable instead of speeding it up. You can have a more interesting splash screen, and you know. Whatnot. So there are some really interesting things. I know we're kind of getting a little later in this podcast, so I want to speed up a little bit, but that's definitely something we should, you know, be paying attention to when you launch an app.
Well, what I'll say on that one is I will happily come back on another episode at some point if we want to talk about the UX tricks and the ideas behind that. That's awesome. That's a whole episode in itself.
We should have a whole episode on accessibility specifically.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And I think a whole episode on like the keyboard covering the text inputs.
That's
unfortunately true.
Yeah, that never seems to, you know, end or go away.
It's so true. It's so true. Lastly, no, this isn't last. This is the second from last. You mentioned bulletproofing your app. So that is really more about handling crashes and exceptions.
Yeah, if you have a try without a catch, if you have any way the app can sort of create this terrible handoff or this jolting experience, it's like that's great during development. QA loves seeing that, development loves seeing that. Users will go 1-star you so fast. Just do anything else. Just be nice about it, you know. And so the one thing I kind of throw in there is that there's a way for you to wrap your entire app so that if it crashes, at least shows a message.
The last one is disable arbitrary URLs in iOS. And this is actually just an iOS specific thing. Apple enabled a thing called ATS, App Transport Security. And from what I understand, this has to do with making sure that everything is secured with HTTPS, you know, SSL. So that's something that React Native kind of disables so that there can be a local, or there's an exception at least for reading local bundles, JavaScript bundles.
Yeah. That's how we get our hot module reloading to work in there, because no one's setting up SSL certificates to serve a file to themselves.
It's a little awkward to do this, but you lay out the process and you have a way to automate it as well.
Yeah. One of the things that is interesting is this. I'm really glad they came out with it. I'm glad this is a problem for React Native, and it's no longer a problem for apps that are going out there. Making non-secure connections or connecting to SSL certs that aren't even really secure is one of the dangers of all these. Like, we release our source code to people, and there's a vulnerability possibly happening there. So I'm really happy that this is a step, but it's easy to forget, and you just leave it in there. There's no reason to.
Well, very cool. That was a lot of information, a lot of things that I didn't think of, I didn't really know. And so that gives a very good path forward for wrapping up your app. Of course, there are probably 100 other things that should be done before you launch your app. I'm sure that people have their own to-do list, but they can add all of these things that you added. Thanks for writing that article and coming on, Gant.
Yeah.
Now we have a section called Weird Bugs, and I have a weird bug. I'm not sure if anybody else does, but I can talk about this one. I don't do a lot of coding, so when I do get an actual weird bug that I can share, I get really excited.
Even the bugs are exciting because you never get to do code.
Exactly. This one's kind of it's kind of stupid, but it is what it is. So I'm working on this new version of Ignite Browser, and I'm kind of rewriting parts of the setup script, the boilerplate script. I'm actually rewriting most of it, to be honest. And there's a part, so I'm supporting both Expo and React Native Vanilla CLI. And there are differences between the two that are a little bit subtle. So if you start it up and you put in --Expo, it will use the Expo CLI to spin up your new app. And if you don't put in Expo, or you put in --no-Expo, it will use the React Native CLI. And I was struggling because the Expo CLI, it would finish spinning up the app, and then it would just take forever to finish the script. And then pretty soon it would run out of memory and crash. And I went and looked at the repo. There's nothing that stands out. Like the app was, spun up correctly. It looked good. Everything was in there. It seemed like everything was good. Why is it sitting here just hanging and then running out of memory? What could be running away at the end of this thing? And it took me a long time, but I finally figured out that Expo's CLI does not copy over the git ignore. So when I was running git commit for everything, it was adding all of node modules and it was committing everything, including, every possible thing was getting added to the git repo. And so that was what was crashing it. It wasn't happening on the other side because the React Native CLI copies over as part of their boilerplate. They copy over a git ignore that gets rid of node modules.
Wow, that is a weird bug. So sneaky.
It's very sneaky. So yeah, I have to deal with. I just have to manually copy over that.
And React Native projects are quite big, right? So
right,
that's
there are a lot of third-party modules and whatnot.
Gosh dang node modules.
Very cool. So this episode, of course, is brought to you by Infinite Red. Gant and I are two of the owners of Infinite Red, and Robin works there. Harris also freelances for us. And of course, thank you to all my hosts, Aditi, Robin, and Harris. Thank you to our guest host, Gant Laborde. It's really nice to have you on here, buddy. I'm sure that we'll have you back in the future. You write about so many different interesting things that we could probably do many episodes with you. We're going to go ahead and put into the show notes links to all of the different things that we've talked about, including the React Native Final Steps, the Who Said It app, Chain React app, the different Fastlane match stuff that we talked about, Squoosh, all these different things. So check the show notes for that. Where can we find you online, Gant?
So you can go to gantlaborde.com, or you can go to Twitter and look for Gant Laborde. I have all the information, future speaking engagements, and like I said, the React Native community is really tight-knit, so say hi to me there, and I'll say hi back.
As long as you're not in Twitter jail.
Oh, no, my Twitter jail. I was in Twitter jail. So for everybody listening, apparently you can get stuck in Twitter jail for 2.5 days because Twitter has a glitch. And then the wonderful people of the community will create a hashtag called #FreeGant. So I'm very happy about that. We sent quite a few messages to Twitter, and they just unapologetically unblocked me one day. It was really weird. As long as I'm not in Twitter jail or Twitter prison, depending on how this case comes up, I will happily respond.
And where can people find you, Harris?
So Twitter as well. So my handle is Brunostmann, which is BRUNOSTMANN. And I'm not as active as Gant, but I'll respond to any DMs or tweets.
And Robin, where are you at?
I'm on Twitter at Robin_Hines, and that's Hines with an E at the end.
And you can find me on Twitter just at Jamin Holmgren, my first and last name. Thank you all for coming along with us. Very exciting guests coming up in the future. I can't announce them, but when we come out with the episodes, you'll get a chance. So make sure that you subscribe to our podcast in all the different places that you can find podcasts. We're there. And let us know what you thought of the episode. Thanks, everybody. See you all later.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.